Now we've got Senator Amy Klobuchar. Thank you so much for coming back on.
Well, thanks, Brian. It's great to be on again.
So we have some big news here. It looks like the legislation reforming the Electoral Count Act is making its way through the Senate. It just passed the Rules Committee 14-1. What would this legislation actually do?
Well, this is very, very important legislation right now because we know that a group of insurrectionists, violent mob, comes in the Capitol the very day we're counting the electoral votes because they were trying to undermine that process, the will of the people. I think this day was a sleepy day in the past. No one hardly noticed it. Lucky we were covered on C-SPAN. But they decided they were going to seize on this moment and basically wipe out the votes of the people. And in the process, people died. Our Capitol was invaded. It was an unbelievable day and a sad moment, and showed how fragile our democracy is, but also how resilient. So this is all based on this law from 1887, Rutherford B. Hayes days. And it was a process set up, but no one had tested it to its limits until the insurrectionists came along. And so what this is a reform so this can never happen again, making clear the vice president's role is ceremonial. So you don't have the hang Mike Pence 40 feet away from the vice president of the United States, making clear that two members are not allowed to gum up the entire process of counting a democracy's votes for president. Now it's 20% of each house. That you can't have a fake slate of electors picked after the fact. This seemed like no-brainers, but they found ways to manipulate the law. And finally, that there be a very set appeals process in place.
So can you just expand on the idea of the electors? Because those are chosen at the state level and then transmitted to the Congress. And so is there a way, I guess, is that what this law does? Are there any issues in terms of a federal law being able to dictate what the states can or can't send?
No, the states are still going to be able to choose their own electors. But what the law says is, since we're the ones charged with counting them, we want them to pick those electors before the election takes place. So it's set who it is. And then, of course, there'll be other standards in the law about it reflecting the actual election results, opportunities for people to go to court if that's what they want to do, but making sure the process moves much more smoothly than it did last time.
So I mentioned that this legislation passed out of the Rules Committee 14-1. Ted Cruz was the only one opposed, and his explanation, such a surprise. His explanation was that he suggested that this is a way for Democrats to be able to cheat with impunity, which, well, I'll ask for your response to that.
Yes. It was absolutely ridiculous because the only people cheating, the only people committing fraud on the voters were the people, and he was one of them, 10 people in the Senate, more in the House, that refused to uphold the results of the election. They didn't like them. So they came up with false claims that things were fraudulent. Claims which, by the way, were struck down by every local election officials, by Republican governors in states like Arizona and in states like Georgia, Republican secretaries of state, and Republican local officials. They were doing their jobs. They were upholding the will of the people, even if they maybe hadn't supported the candidate that the democracy voted for. And yet here you had Ted Cruz, of all people, saying, oh, this somehow perpetrates fraud. There's a reason that we had picked up Republican votes for this bill and that he was the only one, and that other Republicans actually realize this is really about the future of our democracy.
Just on like a human level, I mean, like you said, you had support from every other Republican on that committee, and then you have Ted Cruz spouting off bullshit, basically, that even his own colleagues on his own side of the aisle knew were just completely unfounded, completely baseless. Is there any sense, I'm not trying to ask you to like get into Ted Cruz's head here, but like, isn't there any degree of shame, like when he could say these things that not only the Democrats, but even the Republicans know is based on absolutely nothing?
Well, I think a lot of this was, he's playing national politics, presidential politics, trying to get attention and the like. And some of it he has just said for quite a while. He is the one that made the objection to one of the states on January 6th, in light of everything we'd seen with the massive mob invading the Capitol. He still went forward with it. So, that's who he is. But I thought, for me, I look at it maybe glass half full instead of half empty. I look at all the votes for the bill and how important that was. So I wasn't surprised by what he did. I also thought it was really important to allow, as the chair, the independent Senator Angus King. I had him respond, and then Shelley Capito, a Republican senator who was part of the bipartisan group. I said a few things about his remarks, but for me as a chair, I felt, you know what, he's taking on his own party, and it's going to be really important for them to say something in the form of Shelley. Mitch had already spoken. Mitch McConnell had already spoken. And I felt that was a really important thing, that it not just be, this isn't Democrats versus Republicans. This is actually one guy in your party.
Was there anything in these reforms that you wanted to see included that didn't make it in? Was like anything left on the cutting room floor?
Yeah. Well, I am the chief sponsor of the Freedom to Vote Act, which would set forth rules for same-day registration and mail-in balloting, and just set some minimum standards in place for the country so we don't have what's been going on, which is 16 states now passing voter suppression laws in just the last year, 34 different laws. And I would love to have had a broader bill. We knew that was not possible, not just because of the filibuster, but because those Republicans weren't going to support us on that. We tried that once and we weren't able to get an exception to the filibuster, but we did have all Democrats, including Joe Manchin, signed up for the bill. The second thing I would like to see is more stuff on dark money, and that would have been great. Third thing, there's some things we would have liked to include about the mail system and other things. We can always try again, but for now, the most important thing is to get this bill passed before the end of the year, before we enter another presidential election cycle.
With that said, it's clear that a lot of Republicans are going to look at this bill and suggest that, given its inevitable passage, that every election-related issue will have been resolved. And so there's no need to pass H.R. 1, S1, For the People Act, Freedom to Vote Act, any of those iterations of that bill. What's your response to that? And how do you intend on kind of undermining that bad faith talking point?
Well, I think everyone knows that that isn't true. And I'm sure a few of them will try to say it, but a lot of them can't even say it with a straight face. When you've got bills passing to strike down the use of ballot boxes in Wisconsin, you've got people kicked off the voter rolls in Arizona. You've got the bill that passed in Montana that after 15 years of same-day voting registration, that went away. It is just rampant across the country. So I think we know there are a lot of other issues besides how you count the electoral votes after a presidential race is over. And by the way, that's only about a presidential race. We know there's other things, but it's still important to get this done.
Great. Let's finish off with this. While I have you, I can't not talk about the antitrust beat. So a lot of smaller publications and outlets have been getting really shitty terms for advertising on social media platforms like Facebook. Can you talk about what you've been working on recently in terms of allowing these small outlets and newspapers to be able to negotiate better terms for themselves?
Mm-hmm. I love the term shitty terms. Only on a podcast would I hear the question framed in that way, but it is correct. And one of the things we've seen across the country, which contributes to the decline of our democracy, is the folding of newsrooms and investigative reporting, even local news that would give you things like scores in high school football games or what's the crop prices and those things. That kind of news actually also brings people together. And if you have no local newspaper or no local radio station or TV, you lose that sense of community, and you certainly lose the sense of accountability it takes to cover a city council or business opening or closing and the like. So that's the first thing. And we are projected to lose another 20-30% of our newsrooms. So what this bill does is it says, why have the social media companies, especially Facebook, Google, had incredible increases to their revenue while all the news organizations' revenue, for the most part, has plummeted? Well, that answer is pretty straightforward. That content that the newspapers and the radio, TV produce, a lot of times it's snipped with just a headline and a little bit of snippet, and they don't get adequately compensated for all their work. When people see it on social media, they don't even get to know who's seeing it. And so what this does is it allows these news organizations to combine their leverage, because these little newspapers have no leverage at all with the biggest companies in the world, and it allows them to negotiate rates over a few year period. And it allows them just to focus on rates. But we got that bill out of the Senate Judiciary Committee on a 15-7 vote. We're very excited, bipartisan, because we've got to keep these news organizations alive. That's how we keep democracy alive. As what's the Washington Post's little theme word there, democracy dies in the dark.
We'll leave it there. Amy Klobuchar, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
It's great to be on. Thanks, Brian.